In my first video on this topic, I talked about the economic impacts of cryptocurrencies on developing countries with responsible governments. But if we assume the government is not responsible, perhaps even oppressive and corrupt, can cryptocurrencies help liberate the people? Bitcoin in particular has many downsides, from environmental degradation to the facilitation of scams, money laundering, and ransomware, but some argue it's all worth it because crypto will set you free.
Those in the developing world almost understand the need and importance of this more so than those in the developed world. There's definitely this American ignorance to some degree.
If you ask people why they want money, excluding those at the extremes, most people would say money grants freedom. If you don't need to worry about bills, if you can afford to buy whatever you want, whenever you want, if you don't need a job at all, you are living unconstrained. Money is a tool. It is a means to an end, and that end is freedom. So just like parents can control their children by deciding how money is spent in a household, governments can also exert a degree of control over their people with monetary and fiscal policy. Governments print money, so they decide how much to print. Governments decide who gets the newly printed money, using either spending programs or interest rates. Governments decide how much money to take out of the economy through taxes, and they use a combination of all these things to create incentives and shape behaviors. It's self-evident that responsible government is best for the people, but if that's not a choice you have at your disposal, wouldn't having the ability to earn, store, and transfer value outside the corrupt government's prying eyes and hands be desirable? But of course, we also need to consider whether crypto actually accomplishes that objective. It's one thing to agree in principle with the solution, it's another thing to actually deliver it. So let's try to tackle 3 questions. Does freedom require cryptocurrencies? Is freedom guaranteed by cryptocurrencies? Is freedom enhanced by cryptocurrencies? Satoshi didn't bestow freedom upon an enslaved population from Mt. Gox. When we talk about separating money from government control, we're basically just talking about a black market in money. Black markets aren't new, not even for money. When governments unjustly shut down borders, people smuggle goods across them. When companies charge too much for their products, people create replicas. In the late 90s, Napster shook up the world by making it trivial for anyone to share MP3s of songs they ripped off a CD.
It was on college campuses with high-speed internet that Napster really took off in the fall of '99.
So how many MP3s do you have on your computer? About 600.
Maybe like 100 or something.
6,000 or 7,000.
Napster. It's called file sharing, seen by some as the wave of the future.
When people perceive injustice in a system, black markets can be a check against that perceived abuse. And even with money, there is a black market for cash. If a government tries to impose a standard exchange rate the market disagrees with, you will find money changers on the street converting cash at a more favorable rate. When people lose trust in government money, there has never been a shortage of other things to use in its place. Black markets aren't good necessarily. Responsible authorities are best. But in their absence, people have always used black markets to exercise their freedom. And freedom is good. If people can speak, they can organize. If people can assemble, they can trade. Markets are where people secure their freedom. What you trade in the market matters less than its existence. That is partly why speech and assembly are both in the First Amendment of the US Constitution. There are plenty of examples that show how markets can overwhelm state power, the most obvious of which are countries suffering from hyperinflation caused by government incompetence.
This cup of coffee in a way encapsulates the drama of the Venezuelan crisis. Today, you need this amount of money to buy this cup of coffee. But the inflation has been so out of control in Venezuela in recent years that today, this is the equivalent of what I had to pay 15 years ago for a 1-bedroom flat.
After creating the problem by printing too much money, the solution they typically attempt first is to blame greedy corporations and their political enemies, then impose price controls. But that never works and just compounds suffering by causing shortages. So no, freedom doesn't require cryptocurrencies. It requires free markets. But if you have cryptocurrencies, do they guarantee freedom? Or stated differently, does the existence of cryptocurrencies guarantee the existence of free markets? Authoritarians always try to ban things that threaten their authority.
Jack Ma co-founded Alibaba. Today, it's China's e-commerce giant and one of the biggest companies in the world. But recently, Ma and his tech empire have been in trouble. In April, Alibaba was fined a record $2.8 billion for monopolistic conduct. Its affiliate Ant Group, which Ma holds a controlling stake in, was ordered to overhaul its business after the abrupt suspension of its IPO in November 2020.
This was looking like a fairy tale listing for Ant Group, and there's now been a significant twist.
And since then, Ma has laid low.
Just being quiet is something, very notable that we think of when we think of Jack. We think of him as very loud, brash, and so we're all a bit shocked when he's not speaking.
But Alibaba and Ant are not the only tech firms in the sights of Chinese regulators.
Governments all over the world are banning crypto, but they are doing so mostly to save their energy grids, not necessarily because they feel threatened by it.
Are people going to have blackouts in their homes? Has it already happened?
Собственно, электроэнергии не бесконечно в Казахстане. Если мы говорили в 2019 году, что у нас в Казахстане профицит, то сейчас об этом профиците говорить не приходится. Поэтому мы можем говорить о том, что на каком-то объеме майнинга мы остановимся.
But motivations aren't always easy to decipher.
In January, massive protests erupted across Kazakhstan after a sudden increase in fuel prices. There was no direct link to crypto mining, but the impact was huge for miners. The nationwide internet was shut down. It took the entire industry offline for 5 days. It slowed the global network down by 18% and caused a dip in the price of Bitcoin.
Regardless of their true intentions, they are providing a useful experiment. The question they will help answer is whether crypto can be banned. If they succeed, then crypto can't even guarantee its own survival, let alone a free markets. When it comes to Bitcoin mining, clearly the government will succeed. It's not difficult to find major loads on the electrical grid and shut them down. It has already happened many times.
Kazakhstan's cheap electricity comes at an environmental cost too. Just 20 minutes drive from Energix, 2 other crypto mines are plugged directly into this coal-fired power station.
Even small home-based mining operations could appear similar to marijuana grow-ops that have always been relatively easy to spot. But not all cryptocurrencies require so much power. Let's assume you can operate a node on a basic home computer. You are still communicating over the internet, and governments can track communications on the network. Privacy and security on the internet is a very big topic that isn't really possible to cover in a few minutes, but I think it's instructive to look at China. They have managed to control the internet using a combination of technology and influence.
The Chinese government controls internet connections into and out of China. Many of the websites and apps popular in the West are impossible to use in China. The Great Firewall can also monitor or block access to websites and information the authorities consider problematic.
I'm sure their control is imperfect, but can anything really guarantee freedom while being dependent on its oppressor to provide the rails upon which it rides? Even if you conceal what's in the rail cart, censorship resistant is not censorship proof. It's still just bits on someone else's wire. Or the government could just shut down the internet altogether, like during Egypt's revolution in 2011.
We've never seen this in Egypt, shutting down the country like that.
We haven't seen it in Egypt, but we've seen it elsewhere where they've had these similar demonstrations, Iran, Tunisia, etc. So this is now standard operating procedure from these governments who know that it is social network that is the principal organizing factor for these demonstrations.
Ultimately, it just becomes a question of how far they are willing to go. The problem with cryptocurrencies is that as a user, you don't actually have money in your wallet. You just have the keys to your money. Without access to the blockchain, your crypto is useless. All you could do is hand over the keys to your entire wallet, but the recipient wouldn't even be able to confirm its balance. Cryptocurrencies just don't work without connectivity. People like to say the government can't take your crypto, which isn't entirely true, but what difference does it make if you can't use it? A truly decentralized currency would go peer-to-peer directly, from my phone to your phone over something like Bluetooth that doesn't need to check in with any third party, like cash, which, by the way, already exists. Any argument in favor of crypto securing free markets would probably also apply to cash. But is freedom enhanced by cryptocurrency? Answering this question is a bit tricky. Crypto isn't required for freedom, and it probably can't guarantee it. But those are extreme positions anyway. Extremes can't be the only standard by which we measure success. Most countries probably won't go that far. If preserving free markets is the goal, and increasingly markets are moving online, there is an argument in favor of the benefits an anonymous electronic cash equivalent would provide, but case by case. If the services you use aren't anonymous anyway, does it really matter if the money you use to pay for it is? Regardless, when it comes to surviving authoritarian state power, which was the subject of this video, what really matters is the stuff at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, not your Netflix account. When things are good, society doesn't need a black market in those items. But when things are bad, they could feel like a lifeline. And to the extent crypto can help establish that black market, it could be useful. Ironically, the desire to legitimize Bitcoin by recruiting millions of users and bringing it into the mainstream could undermine its only value proposition and turn out to be its downfall. Bitcoin probably would have been better off if your grandmother never heard of it and the price stabilized at $1, waiting in the shadows, too small and irrelevant for any state power to care about it. But even in that case, once it was used effectively in one instance, their contemporaries will learn it needs to be dealt with. But we are where we are, so does crypto help? Right now, as the Turkish lira is plunging, what added value does Bitcoin provide over US dollars? Or does the only crypto use case require the entire world to experience collapse simultaneously? Yes, they exist outside the banking system, which in theory could help their black market use case, but if the price drops 50% in a few weeks, just when you need it most, and you have alternatives, who cares? How likely is it that something so volatile will be the first and best option? Cryptocurrencies are not effective savings. The price is too volatile. They are not inflation hedges. They aren't tied to anything in the real economy. They are not investments. They don't produce anything of value. Even theoretically, it's hard to find any use case for any blockchain-dependent cryptocurrency, even one that lives outside the banking system, unless it can first demonstrate price stability. And perhaps more importantly, any currency that is effective as a black market enabler will also inevitably enable all kinds of other negative externalities, even in countries without authoritarian governments. There really is no argument in favor of crypto without either admitting it can't deliver on its promises of incorruptible government-free black market money, in which case it's useless, or deliberately deciding to enable and facilitate financial crimes. There is no middle ground. Either your money is anonymous and decentralized, or it's not. The crypto industry still has many technical challenges to solve. Whether it's the blockchain trilemma between decentralization, scalability, and security, or people losing private keys for any of a million perfectly valid reasons, like dying. But ultimately, it feels that this current generation of products still falls short of its ambitions. Technologies that are mostly unnecessary or sacrifice convenience for faith-based idealism don't tend to win. But they also don't tend to disappear very easily.